It's a fun little project. It's fairly easy, and now I've got a couple little gifts I can give to somebody. So why don't you go try making your own? Hi there, I'm Rich. Welcome to my workshop. You know, one of the fun things about being a woodworker is being able to make gifts for people. You know, sometimes we need some motivation for our projects, and being able to make something that you're going to give to somebody kind of makes it a little more worthwhile. Well, I want to show you a project that's a great little gift. You know, it's kind of a classic woodworking project, and that's making a serving board or a cutting board, or some people call them charcuterie boards. These are kind of small, but the same idea applies even for something bigger. I've got two of them here, and this is a really simple project to do, but it impresses people. Now, one of the nice things about this project is you can embellish it, as I have with these, adding this walnut in. The original design is just all the same wood. Makes it a little more special, makes it a little more personalized, and when people receive a gift like this and they know you've made it, there's just something special about it. So let's get started. It's always a good idea to make these things out of hardwood rather than out of, say, you know, pine, softwood. If you're ever going to have to cut on one, you do with pine. Pine is soft, you end up scratching it up with a knife. Typically use hardwood. The picture here looks like this is, say, maple or maybe walnut. I went to my local lumber yard, and really they don't have a great selection of hardwoods. I bought a piece of oak, and this is what I'm going to make it out of, is oak. I like oak. I think oak is a beautiful wood. The grains really pops on it, and so we're going to make it out of oak. And the plan here comes with a picture here, but the main thing is we've got patterns, printable patterns for the two different styles. Okay, now this one's 4 3/4 by 10 inches, and this one's 6 inches by 9 3/4. Okay, so if I want to cut this 6 inches out of one board, I've actually got to buy a 1x8, and a 1x8 oak 1x8 is going to be a little pricey. 4 3/4, that'd be a 1x6, but if I'm buying a 1x8, I could do it anyway. So when I bought my oak, you know, so this isn't any 6 inches wide. This is actually a 1x3, which means it's 2.5 inches wide. So if I put two pieces of this together, edge laminating it, I get 5 inches, and that's wide enough for the 4 3/4. And if I put three pieces together, it's 7.5 inches wide, and that's wide enough for the 6-inch one. And so that's what I'm going to do, edge gluing these pieces together and making it a little fancier. The plans really don't call for that, but they just say use a board. Well, a board can be an edge laminated board, and that's what I'm going to make it out. So I've gone ahead and cut up my board into lengths. These are 10.5 inches long, which is just a bit longer than what I need for it. And while I was at it, gosh, I found some walnuts sitting there in my stocks, and I just decided to go ahead and add some walnut in here. I really like using contrasting woods together because they just make the design pop, makes it look, you know, takes up another step, makes it look more expensive. And so I'm putting some walnut in here. Now, typically when you're edge gluing boards like this, you need to run the joining edges through a planer or plane them with a hand plane to make sure they're smooth and straight. And if I had cut these on a table saw, I would definitely need to do that. But because they came from the mill this way, they've already been finished. And so I've got a good clean surface to connect together. So I'm not worried about that. And I've already gone ahead and spread glue on the pieces and set them together. Now I need to clamp them. Now when you're putting glue on something like this, one of the things you want to do is make sure you spread the glue out. Don't just run that bead of glue down the middle and expect it to squeeze out. Yeah, it'll squeeze out, but it won't squeeze evenly. So you may not end up with what you want. And I'm going to go ahead and use 3 bar clamps. These are actually longer clamps than what I need, but I don't have the exact size I need. I'm just tightening it up a little bit, mostly because I don't want it to go cockeyed on me while I'm putting the other clamps in place. So we'll just tighten a little bit, and then we'll go back and tighten them up the rest of the way. Getting ready to run these boards through the planer just to smooth them out. Now, if you don't have a planer, you don't have to use a planer to do this. You can do it with a sander. Probably a belt sander or even a random orbital sander will do it. I'm using the planer because I have it available. But because they're so little, they really don't run through a planer well. So what I'm doing is I'm gluing them to a larger board, which means that they'll run through together. as a pair. But the other thing that's going to do for me is that it's going to help. Not only is it going to help get them leveled out, but it's going to help eliminate what's called snipe. Now, snipe is a place towards the end of your board as you're coming through the planer, if I'm going in this way, where you get more of a cut because of it coming off the wheels. Okay, there's some rollers in there that help make sure that your piece is pressed down against the table. All right, so what I'm doing here is I've got a couple pieces of scrap. This is actually some cut off from some trim. You can use literally anything for this. And I'm gluing them on here. Now these stick up just a touch higher than the highest point I've got here. So it's going to cut these first. But the other thing is, as I'm feeding through, when I get to the end, that area that would be sniped is right here. So I might get sniped in these, and I don't care, because when I get done, I'm throwing them away. These will come out of it good. And then, because I'm using hot melt glue to hold it on, it can all come apart. And you can clean the hot melt glue off the base piece of wood, and it's ready to be used for something else. As I said, if you don't have a planer available to you, you can still smooth these out, get them leveled out with either a belt sander or a random orbital sander. The real key you want to watch out for when you do that is you don't want to leave the sander in one place. You want to keep it moving around as you're sanding so that you don't put any gouges in the surface, okay? I've got this up against a stop here on my bench, and let's see how it goes. What I'm really looking for here is ridges in the places between where the woods come together. Now, even if I sand it with a belt sander, I want to go to finer sanders afterwards because that's going to leave the surface rather rough. So now that I've got a relatively smooth surface, I'll be doing more sanding later. I can go ahead and lay out my pieces, my patterns, I mean, on my pieces. So, and then trace them. You want to trace them, you want to get a good dark trace when you do this. I'm not sure how well my mechanical pencil is going to do here. You'd probably be better off with a regular pencil, nice and sharp, or even a fine point Sharpie marker. Ballpoint pen. I mean, it really doesn't matter what you use. What matters is that you're able to see the line when you get done. And as far as my mark there in the middle, I'm just going to use my little center punch to transfer that. So this one is now ready to cut out. The best possible saw for cutting these boards out is a scroll saw. A scroll saw is generally a benchtop tool, or some people put them on a stand. It's designed for cutting tight curves, and that's what makes it so great for this. We have some curves that are fairly tight, and we need to get them cut as clean as possible. We can always sand them later to make it a little better, but we really want to get them as good as possible. If you don't have a scroll saw, another option is a bandsaw. Although a bandsaw is going to have a hard time with these tight curves, you're probably going to have to cut it like segmented and then sand it. Using a narrower blade on a bandsaw is beneficial. The other option is a jigsaw, which is a handheld electric tool. Jigsaws work. I'm not overly fond of them, and the main reason for that is because it's very, very easy when you're using a jigsaw to put sideways pressure on that blade and actually bend the blade. And not only does it ruin the blade, but you end up with a crooked cut. So you have to be careful using it, but they will work. And for years and years and years before I had a scroll saw, that's what I used, okay? Now, one of the things we want to make sure of is that we have the right blade in. Blades are measured in the number of teeth that are in the blade. And I realize this is probably not that visible on the camera, but this blade here has got about 20 teeth per inch, and this one's got about 10 teeth per inch. You want a minimum of 3 teeth for the material thickness. So if I hold this up to the side of my material here, I actually have about 5 or 6 teeth. That'll work good. Now, why would I want to use that instead of the finer tooth blade? Because what's going to happen with this finer tooth blade is that the teeth are going to get filled up with sawdust and the blade isn't going to cut as well. So a blade with larger teeth is going to actually cut through this material better than the smaller teeth. I've actually got a choice of a couple different sanders I could use to sand this now that I've cut it out. If I had inside curves, I'd be using an oscillated spindle sander, but because it's all outside curves, I'm going to go ahead and do it here on the belt sander. Our next step is to put the holes in these boards as shown on the pattern. This one gets a 1-inch hole and this one gets a 1.5-inch hole. And there's several different ways we can go about this. Probably the most common for most guys is to have a spade bit. Spade bits are good for holes up to inch, maybe 1.5 inches. The trick is avoiding tear out with them. Now, having them really sharp helps. The other thing that helps is don't drill all the way through. Go through most of the way from one side and then flip your workpiece over and finish the hole up from the other side. The same can be said for a hole saw. Now, good hole saws will do a decent hole for you. Again, you're going to get tear out on the backside if you try and cut it all the way through. The absolute best is to use a Forstner bit, and I've got Forstner bits both in 1 and 1.5 inch sizes, and this is probably the way I'm going to go because it's going to give me the cleanest hole. Forstner bits are designed for making flat bottom holes, but when you got to go through something, they're excellent for that as well. You can do this with a hand drill, but I prefer to do it with a drill press simply because that makes sure that the bit is absolutely perpendicular to the workpiece. So all that's left before sanding and finishing is to round the edges. That's partially for appearance, partially to keep people from getting splinters. The reason we did the holes before doing the edges is so that we can do the same thing with the hole. So I've got an 1/8 of an inch round over bit chucked up in my trim router, and we'll just run that around the edges, and that will take care of routing the edges for us. So here we've got our 2 little boards ready to go. They still need a coat or 2 of varnish on them to seal them. Now, let me say this, okay? The instructions call for putting varnish on these, and I'm in agreement with that. But if you're going to use them for cutting boards, I wouldn't use varnish. Instead, I would oil them with just mineral oil. Mineral oil is food safe, and you don't have to worry about any slivers of wood oil coming off into the food. Varnish is considered food safe as well, but if you're using a knife with it and you end up cutting into the varnish, you could get slivers of it into the food. So that's something to avoid, okay? But, you know, you can, as you can see, just a little bit of extra variety. We make these really beautiful. There's a lot of different ways you could go about this, but it's a fun little project. It's fairly easy, and now I've got a couple little gifts I can give to somebody. So, why don't you go try making your own, and we'll see you next time.